Hello, and welcome to my presentation on the Knights Templar. Today, I am going to be taking you through the rise and fall of one of the most powerful organizations in medieval Europe. I will be discussing who they were, what they did, and how they became so powerful and why they were eventually destroyed and why their organization fell. I know that we had touched a little bit on this in the readings, but this is a topic that I found very interesting, which is why I kind of wanted to go into a little bit further in depth in my presentation and do my own research on the topic. So just to get started, as a little introduction, the Knights Templar were founded in 1118 CE during the aftermath of the First Crusade. So during this time, Jerusalem was captured by Christian forces, and European pilgrims started to travel to the Holy Land. And their journeys, when they were taking these voyages, were very, very dangerous. So a small group of knights had offered to protect the travelers along their journey. They took vows of poverty and obedience, just as the monks did. And if you look in this picture that I have added to the left right here, this is just a map of Crusader Jerusalem to kind of give you a little bit more of an understanding of like their territory and where exactly they were located. But their main focus was they really were just dedicated to protecting travelers at the time. The Templars had finally gained support from the Church in around 1139 CE. Pope Innocent II, who is pictured here on the right in that photo, he gave the Templars special privileges. So what this meant was that they did not have to pay taxes. They were also allowed to build their own churches, and their most unique and I think arguably their most important privilege was that they answered only to the Pope. So no king or no bishop was able to interfere and give them orders on how their organization was really run, and this obviously made them extremely powerful, especially as their organization began to truly expand throughout Europe. So what was their purpose? Their order was structured more like a military, so it had three different ranking systems. At the top were the knights. These were noble-born warriors who wore the white mantle with the red cross. You can see in this image that I have to the left right here of something that a knight would wear. In the center, he has, the white mantle with the red cross directly in the center and the helmet on, and that is like their traditional uniform and what they wore day to day. And then below the knights were the sergeants, who they were not born noble, but they still served as support troops and also they served as laborers. The next and the final rank were the chaplains. They didn't have too much of a large role as they were in the lowest rank, but they did provide all of the spiritual guidance of the group, and they also were the ones that were responsible for leading the religious services. All of the Templars lived communally. They all followed a daily schedule of prayer and training, and they were all expected to obey their superiors. So they were either expected to obey their knights that they were reporting to, and obviously they were expected to obey the Pope, who was their main superior. Their lives were very, very simple, very traditional. They really didn't have any personal possessions, no luxuries at all. They had taken a vow of poverty, so they weren't people who were living a very luxurious lifestyle, at least at this time when they had first established their group. And again, their original purpose was truly just to protect Christian pilgrims that were crossing Jerusalem. So, their role in the Crusades, they were known for their bravery when it came to battle, and they had a huge role in the Second and the Third Crusades. In the picture on the right here, this is a picture of the Battle of Hattin that I am going to dive a little bit deeper into now. So, the Knights Templar were very crucial players in several major crusades, especially like I had just said, the second and the third. But one of their most important moments for the Templars was the Battle of Hattin. So this battle took place on July 4th of 1187. And this battle was a major turning point for the Crusader presence, but it also was a huge devastating loss for the Templars. So at this time, the Templars and other Christian forces, their goal was to defend the Crusader states against the growing power of Saladin, who was a military leader who wanted to reclaim Jerusalem to Islam. The Christian army, including a lot of Templars, walked in the summer heat to confront his forces, but they accidentally had left behind their water sources. Excuse me. They became trapped in the hills near the horns of Hattin, which is where Saladin's army surrounded them, cut off all of their access that they might have had to water, and actually lit fire to the dry grass in order to, really make them super exhausted and weaken them completely. The Crusaders were extremely dehydrated, they were tired, and they were so overwhelmed, and they were surrounded, and it truly was just a complete military disaster. The Templars did fight very bravely in this battle. However, the odds truly were just against them. A lot of them were killed in battle, and the ones that were not killed in battle were captured and tortured. Saladin was usually merciful to regular knights. However, he and, like some other leaders that we will discuss later, considered the Templars to be very dangerous people, and as a result, basically every single Templar that was captured was executed and most likely beheaded because they were not willing to convert their faith to Islam like he had wanted. This defeat did allow Saladin to recapture Jerusalem just a few months later in October of 1187, and the battle really became, a true symbol of bravery for the Templars, but it also exposed the weaknesses of Crusader leadership, and it really just changed the whole course of the Crusades. This was a very, very important battle. Although they had taken their vow of poverty, the knights became very wealthy. This is because nobles across Europe ended up donating land, castles, and even money to the Templars in exchange for their spiritual benefits. This then allowed them to actually manage estates. They even ran some farms, and they were able to develop an early form of international banking. They also offered safe storage of money and letters of credit. So kings and nobles had used them kind of like a bank, and their financial network stretched from England all the way to the Holy Land. Okay, this is my favorite slide in the whole entire presentation, is their architecture. The Templars, again, they were able to build their own churches, which was a privilege, and so they built a ton of impressive architecture. In the Holy Land, they had constructed castles, and in Europe, they built round churches. So their architecture combined kind of religious symbolism, but also with their military practices, because that is what they stood for. So you can see in this photo to the left, this is the Tomar Castle in Portugal. And you can see that it has huge walls with like almost defensive looking towers, but also inside of the castle, there were areas for worship. And then in the photo on my right, that is the Temple Church in London, and you can see how kind of it is more of like a rounded structure. Actually, if you look up, or if you just see like photos of this church, it is so beautiful on the inside. The architecture is just so gorgeous. This is my favorite part about learning about this group of knights. I thought this was so interesting. Okay, so here is where we kind of get into a little bit of their downfall. So as the Templars grew in power, a lot of people became threatened. More specifically, King Philip IV of France was very threatened by this group. He had owed them a lot of money and was really afraid of their independence. He saw them as a threat, not only in a financial way, but also politically, because, like I had mentioned earlier, unlike other knights, Templars didn't swear loyalty or report to any form of king or other form of higher power besides the Pope. So in Philip's eyes, they were just like a wealthy, armed group of people that he had no control over, no influence on, and that made them a really huge threat, honestly. And on Friday the 13th in 1307, Philip ordered the arrest of all the Templars in France. So this date is actually where the unlucky Friday the 13th superstition had come from, which I had never known until I had just researched this. So he had accused them of hearsay and secret rituals, which the majority of the things he had accused them of were untrue. But he ended up torturing them until many Templars ended up confessing to these things. And these confessions obviously were coerced, but they also were used to justify further arrests and kind of just terminate the Templar Society permanently. In 1312, Pope Clement V, under pressure from Philip, he completely banned the Templars. Their remaining wealth and their lands were transferred over and they no longer had access to them. And in 1314, the last Grand Master, Jaques de Malloy, was burned at the stake in Paris. So there is a legend that says that as he burned, he cursed the king and the pope, and that they had both ended up dying later that year. Obviously, that is just a myth, so who knows if that is actually true. But at this point, the Templars had been completely destroyed. However, even though their legacy, even though their, whole group was terminated and destroyed, they had left a really big legacy behind. Their banking system was way ahead of its time, and it ended up influencing the development of other European finance in the future. Also, their model of military religious service inspired other orders that came later, such as the Teutonic Knights. Overall, the Knights Templar were once very poor warrior monks. They became naturally one of the most powerful institutions in medieval Europe because their rise was truly centered around the devotion and discipline to their faith and their strong desire to protect it. And their fall was centered around envy and politics, which is unfortunately something that we do still see today. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. I hope that you enjoyed. I also just wanted to include some sources that I used to do this. So some of the text on the slides and some of my research, it came from the two books, The New Knighthood, A History of the Order of the Temple by Malcolm Barber. And then the other one was The Knights Templar, A New History, which came from Helen Nicholson. Thank you so much again.